Hi guys, it's Jonelle. Today we're going to be going over the beast of the document. I know that we all enjoy the prior written notice. So today we will be going over the PWN, the prior written notice, and it'll be a tad bit overwhelming in terms of what you're going to be seeing on the screen, but just know that you can always go to the Special Ed Online Handbook for additional samples for a prior written notice, okay? So essentially, a prior written notice is to be used when the district intends to initiate, change, or refuse an action. For example, if the district is initiating an assessment, a prior written notice is to accompany the assessment plan, which essentially is us notifying the parents that we as a district are intending to assess. The prior written notice, contrary to the name, does not always need to be provided prior to an action. If the district is recommending a change in the program, the discussion would actually happen at the IEP. And then, if a change was determined to be appropriate and consented to by the family, then a PWN would follow after the IEP. And even though it says a prior written notice, if we give it to them ahead of time, it would be considered predetermination. Okay. So the only time that really a PWN needs to really go out ahead of time is with an assessment plan for an initial or a triennial, or to add any additional assessments, a PWN should accompany. Okay. A PWN can also actually be used to deny parent requests. And the best practice would actually be to discuss the request at the IEP meeting so that way you can document it in the PWN. All right. We'll get started, and I'll kind of flip back and forth between a couple of this and another page so you can see that this is what it looks like on SEIS versus what it looks like when we print out a sample. This is just a sample when we print it out. So there are essentially 3 rows that we're looking at. The actions proposed, which is kind of everything in this area. The actions refused. When we as a district are refusing something, we would put that information in here. And then the 3rd row would be that's a little much. The other options considered, sorry, you can see it, but essentially the other options considered, the reasons for rejecting other options, and then other factors relevant to the actions proposed and or refused, okay? So 3 main rows that we'll be going over, all right? Go back to SEIS. So the date you're going to be inputting in here, if you're providing an assessment plan, you're going to put the date that you're sending out that assessment plan. For change of placements, it would be the date that you're making the decision for the change. If you're denying a parent request, you're going to want to use the date of refusal. And best practice is to respond to a parent request within 15 calendar days, okay? So for the purpose of this, we have chosen May 5th or May 7th as a date because technically our student, Sarah Brown, would be having a triennial due in September. You're going to pick the purpose as to why you're providing the prior written notice. So there's identification. That's where you're going to want to look, and there can be more than just one purpose checked off. Identification, evaluation, placement, or provision of FAPE. So identification or other. Identification would be the eligibility category of the student, may be added, changed, or refused. Evaluation could include the district's intent to initiate or refuse an assessment. Educational placement, that the IEP team recommends a change of placement or the district is refusing a parent's request for a change of placement. Provision of FAPE, when the students exited from special education either through graduation, parent revocation, or maybe they're no longer eligible. A change in service frequency or duration, or if we're eliminating a certain service, we would check off FAPE. And then there's other, if there's anything that's not covered in the above areas. For example, if we are responding to a parent request about a one-on-one, or if a parent is asking for a specific methodology to be listed inside of the IEP, then we can mark that as other and indicate that in here, okay? So we're going to go into the actions proposed. And the first thing you're going to see is the green button. And if you actually open that up, it'll help. And you see all of this information listed here. It looks a little overwhelming. We've just tried to provide a little bit of information about each one, so you have a better idea of how to, or maybe what you're completing your PWN for. So once I check off that, click the green button, it'll bring me to this page. So you do not need to mark every single one of these. You are only going to mark the ones that pertain to your PWN. We've marked them so that we can give you examples in here of how to complete them, but please remember, do not mark all of them off together. Only mark off the ones that are appropriate for your PWN. So under identification, there's determining the initial special ed eligibility. If you do check that off, it leaves an open box, and you can add in to determine whether a student has a disability or is eligible for special education. To determine your child's continued SPED eligibility status, so this is if you're doing maybe a triennial, you're going to list the current eligibility includes, maybe what their current eligibility is to see if they continue to qualify for special education. That would be through a triennial. If we are recommending to change your child's disability category based on comprehensive reevaluation. So if we have reassessed our kid through a triennial and realize that we are going to be changing the student's eligibility category from one to another, then we would go ahead and add that information in here. And then other, again, if there's nothing that's covered in the above sections, or if, like our example is if they want to conduct a speech and language assessment to determine whether the student's eligible for these services, then you can go ahead and mark other and add that in there. Evaluation also has checkboxes. Conducting an initial comprehensive, and if we indicate the areas to be assessed by the psychological, speech and language, or academic, then you would add that information here. A reevaluation is a triennial. Conduct an independent educational assessment, and then what areas the parent is actually being requested to be assessed, or whether the district approves or will file. And if you have somebody asking for an IEE, then make sure that you're contacting your program specialist, because they will be the ones to work with you and work with the family to create the PWN and find out what the parent is requesting the IEE for and whether or not we will be moving forward or we will be filing. And from that point, your program specialist will be working with the family and providing the family with information about IEEs, okay? So if you get an IEE request, make sure that you are including your program specialist. And then other, if an evaluation is not covered under an initial or triennial, then you could add that information in here. So typically assessments that can be OT, PT, speech and language, or ERMs, especially social emotional or academics that are not, that may not be typically an initial or the triennial, then those can be added under other. All right. Educational placement. There are initiate educational placement in the special ed, change in educational placement. That's if we're doing a change of placement. Termination of SPED and related services. So if we are eliminating a speech and language service because they no longer qualify, or if the student just no longer qualifies for special ed altogether, then we could check that. Okay, if we are looking at a disciplinary removal for more than 10 days of school, which is including an MDR, okay, and then disciplinary removal on an interim education alternative setting. Just make sure if there's going to be any disciplinary removals spanning longer than 10 days, or if a student is being maybe up for expulsion, that you're connecting with your program specialist, because a manifestation determination review does need to happen, which is a whole nother video, but feel free to check that one out. So if any of these boxes are appropriate for the action, just mark those boxes. If they do not fall in there, then go ahead and check other, and then you can add in what it is. All right. And then we also have FAPE. So provision of FAPE could be exiting your child from special education, a change in frequency or duration of special ed services, elimination of a related service, and it could be another, which is to include any additional information in regards to a change in FAPE covered, not covered by any of these above actions. So maybe we're eliminating a behavior plan and replacing it with a behavior goal, or we're ending maybe consult services. We can go ahead and add that under other. All right. So, but essentially, if you're changing a duration of special education services or frequency, then you're just going to describe how it's going to be changing. And if you're eliminating a related service, maybe you're stating what we're eliminating and then why. And then we'll go deeper into it. And if you have not filled out a PWN before, just know that it is a very redundant form, and you will be restating most of it pretty continuously throughout the form. Okay. So all of these sections, everything from identification over to FAPE, is what we had covered through this green box up here. Okay. So once you check off the box and you fill in the little information, it will auto-populate up here. So that's why this part looks so overwhelming, is because we had checked off each of these boxes to give you guys information on how to complete those sections, okay? So this reason for proposed action, and I will pull up that, this is the proposed action, and then the reason for proposed action, everything will be provided in here. Okay, so just kind of in comparison, you'll see the reasons for proposed action here on a printed out SEIS form, versus here it's going to be this section. Okay, so you're going to actually write a narrative of the reasons that you will be proposing this, whatever you're providing this PWN for. So for right now, we're just using it as a triennial evaluation. And Sarah is due for a triennial evaluation on or before 9/14/2020 to determine continued eligibility, present levels of performance, and should she continue to be eligible, goals, services, and supports. Okay. And then you have evaluation procedures, test records, or reports used in deciding for those actions proposed. And in this section, again, there's also a green button that you're going to have here. You want to look, and let me click that open for you. So there's a list, a huge list of different things. And what you're going to want to look at over here is, are we looking at, if we're doing this for a triennial, what did we use that she previously had inside of her IEP to help us determine that she was found eligible at one point, and we're going to re-review those things. So for this, for the purpose of this PWN for a triennial, we used her previous psychoeducational assessment report dated, and then you would need to have that old report on hand or access to that to provide the old date that it had, that it was used in the IEP. We're also using student progress and achieving IEP goals. So we're reviewing her old goals. Did she make progress on them? We're going to be reviewing teacher reports. And this pretty much tells you how to complete this section. You're going to check off items that support initiating the action. In addition, the other box, you can list any other information that's relevant, excuse me, as to why you're initiating the assessment, such as present levels of performance, grades, progress on goals, and the date of her last triennial. All right. And if you click save, it will provide all of this information on this area. Okay. So that the dates, the action is to be implemented you're going to insert the date that the action is that you're providing this. So this may be the same date that you are actually writing the PWN. If it is an exit IEP for a student, like if they're graduating with a diploma, then you can put the date that they are going to be graduating here. So it depends on what you're writing your PWN for, is what date is the action will actually be implemented. Okay, so if maybe we are changing the student from Gen Ed or SDC mild moderate into Gen Ed with resource, we could provide this with a change of placement. So the date that we put here is the date that we are recommending the change of placement to actually happen. Okay. So now we're on that second row that I had showed you in the PDF, which is the actions refused. And in this section, the actions, any actions that we're refusing. So if we are refusing a parent request, we would go ahead and add this information into the actions refused. Again, if we click on this green button, all of these options are going to pop up. Okay. If you are proposing a triennial assessment, we're likely not also refusing anything in that same breath. So you don't have to have something in the refuse section. If we're proposing something, you don't always have to refuse. So it can be an and or. Okay. So here, again, the identification is determining your child's initial special ed eligibility if we're refusing a parent's request for an initial evaluation, or if the eligibility, when it doesn't meet the eligibility criteria. So maybe the family is providing information that their doctor finds a student eligible or diagnosed with autism. But under the school criteria, the student doesn't meet the eligibility criteria, we could propose that action refused. Okay. Determine continued special ed eligibility. So refusing a parent's request for continued eligibility. So if they're no longer found eligible and a parent requests continued eligibility, we could check that off. If we're refusing a change in the disability category. Again, this could go with a parent's request from a medical provider, and they at this time don't meet the educational eligibility requirements. Okay. And then other, you can add in any other requested areas of identification refused, and then explain them if they're not covered in any of these above. Evaluation, if we are going to be refusing a parent's evaluation, we should have information to back that up. Okay. Educational placement, if we're refusing a change in educational placement, we can mark these. Same thing with provision of FAPE. How to identify the change in service that a parent requests. If we check off elimination of related service. Identify the service that the parent does not want eliminated. And then other, identify any other areas related to the provision of FAPE that parents are requesting and that we are denying. So again, like a behavior plan or a one-to-one, then we could add that information in here. So when we go back, again, to the actions refused, which is where we were, all of this is in here. Not every box needs to be completed, just what you're providing the actions refused from the district are. All right. So the reasons for the refused actions, why are we as a district refusing the request? Okay, so you want to list out, and you want to have data for all of these. List out reasons that we are refusing maybe a paraeducator because the strategies that are happening inside of the classroom are working and we're seeing progress on goals. If, any kind of any information through emails, through IEP meetings, through progress on goals, through documented student work samples, any information and data that we have to bring forward to families for proposals or for refusals should be added into the prior written notice, okay? And then evaluation procedures. And this is kind of the information. Where are we gathering this information as to why we are refusing this? And again, it provides you a whole list and you can check off what you want. Or you can mark in other and list them as to this would be the basis of why we're refusing the parent's request. And this will also have a date as to when we are, actions refused. This one does not have a date. Sorry, don't worry about that. Other options considered. So when we get a little further, this is going to be that third row that we talk about. So the other options considered, we're going to list anything else that was considered in lieu of the comprehensive evaluation. For example, the IEP team considered review of records instead of a comprehensive evaluation, but that the team considered a partial assessment in academic areas and social emotional. So anything else that we had thought of before either proposing an action or refusing an action. Okay. And again, see, this is where we're talking about the redundancy that's happening, because I'm sure we've already talked about reasons that we're rejecting other options. So anything else that we're rejecting, list the reasons as to why we're rejecting the other options we're rejecting. So if we are saying that we looked at doing a review of record, but we're not moving forward with a review of record because we're going to do a full triennial evaluation, that the information that was provided has not been consistent throughout the years, so the team is going to move forward and do a full academic testing, psychoeducational evaluation on the student. Okay, so here the example is that IEP team determined that a full evaluation of skill areas was warranted to develop present levels of performance, goals, and services and supports to address Sarah's needs. Although Sarah has been doing well in school and passing her classes, she continues to struggle in reading and completing her homework. So they have that additional information here. And then other factors relevant. Any other factors that were relevant to this proposal for a triennial evaluation. We want to just provide the information of anything else that we have thought about, why it was relevant to why we had proposed this action or why we had refused it. So here we have Sarah is currently on track to graduate high school. She has been passing all of her classes and maintaining average grades. However, her struggles in reading interferes with her academic success and makes homework, particularly written assignments, very difficult for her. Okay, so we looked at all these other items, why we're proposing it. We're proposing actually to move forward with the triennial evaluation. Okay. As we scroll down, the last parts really are just the information that you need to provide. Who is the contact person? So this would be you as the case manager. What the position is, the phone number and an email where they can contact you at. Should they have any additional questions? And the last question asked is the IEP. So this is the last IEP, but don't worry about the date because this is a mock student. If it's attached to this prior written notice, yes or not applicable. Usually if you're providing it for a triennial assessment, the IEP is not usually attached because you're providing this information before or an initial prior to actually having an IEP. If it is for other cases such as refusals for a one-on-one, or if it's for a change of placement, then usually that will go out with the IEP, and so then you can mark that as yes. Okay. At the bottom of the video, I will give you a link to the different samples of the prior written notice that we have on the online handbook. So feel free to check those samples out. Obviously, they are not cookie cutter. They will be adjusted to each and every one of your cases that you'll be needing a PWN for, but it's just there for a sample for you at least to review. Okay? Thanks, guys.